Hey there, this is Phil. Welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm here with Skye Jitani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, second time I'm doing this because your internet keeps freezing up, and the first time it didn't work and it messed up everything. And so I don't even know if I have energy anymore to do the podcast, but I'm going to do my best. And we also have Kaitlyn Schiess here. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Phil.
How are you, Kaitlyn?
I'm good. I have snow in Dallas, Texas today, so it's a really big deal.
No,
I do.
You just want to be cool like us Northerners, so you're saying that you have snow.
Oh, we're not cool. We're all shut inside because we can't leave our houses without dying in the street, so it's...
Right.
I love how a little snow will do that, but a global pandemic in Texas, they're like, who cares?
That's very true.
Well, you can see snow. You can't see germs.
It's true. So can't verify it's there.
So did you sled? Did you build a snowman? Did you want to build a snowman? What did you do when you saw the snow, Kaitlyn?
I checked my email to see if school was canceled.
Is it just a dusting, or is there like inches and inches of snow?
We have like 5 inches.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you could build a snowman.
Are you in Dallas proper?
Yes.
Okay, not in a suburb somewhere?
Mm-mm.
Okay, Skye and I are outside Chicago, where according to the tops of my trash cans that are on the shady side of my house, so they don't get any melt from the sun, we've gotten, I'd say, close to 24 inches.
I live in a cul-de-sac.
On my trash cans.
I live in a cul-de-sac, and
which is French for only upper class suburbanites live here, please.
What? There are cul-de-sacs and
No, they're not.
Anyway, no. So they've built this mountain of snow in the middle of the cul-de-sac.
Really?
And it's huge, and it's not going to melt till like June or July. It's just
right.
It'll
be there forever.
And it's so icy now. It's like Everest, and little children every day are climbing it. And
has anyone burrowed into it?
No, it's too hard.
Dangerous.
You can't.
Oh, okay.
It's like a solid. It's like glacial ice at this point. But I keep worried these little kids are going to tumble off it into the back of my car or something.
Wow, what if it starts moving like a glacier and just slowly moving towards someone's house? It'll be like roulette. Roulette?
You're getting your French all screwed up.
Oh, man. Here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, so we're supposed to get like 6 more inches today.
Mm-hmm.
6 or 7 more inches on top of the 24 or 25 we have already.
I don't recall a winter like this ever.
No, honestly, no, because we usually, we get snow, but it doesn't stay, long enough to get more on top of it and more on top of it and more. That's a, northern Minnesota thing.
Yeah, normally you get a wave of it and then it melts and then you get some more and it melts and it's kind of on it. But I haven't seen the ground in weeks and weeks.
It's fun. And I'm used to because it's been, it was 1 when I woke up this morning. It's now 10. I've kind of gotten used to the temperature. If you dress for the weather, I don't know, Kaitlyn, do people in Dallas know how to dress for the weather? Is that even a phrase in Dallas?
They overdress for the winter.
Oh, really?
Like when it was like 20 or 30 degrees a couple days ago, people were wearing like their biggest parkas and, all of the things. We don't have it, but we'll find just more layers of clothing.
Okay. But then if you start out at 10, you don't really have anywhere to go when it actually gets really, really cold. True. If you start out with you're wearing all your clothes.
Yeah, we're not leaving.
You've gone inside. Okay. Anything interesting happening out in West or North Aurora, Jason?
Not really. I think there was a house that randomly blew up yesterday. Just like all of a sudden.
That seems like a thing.
It's like a couple blocks that way. It's just
like a gas leak.
They don't know. It's just a crater in the ground. It's been abandoned for a while, and
then it exploded.
It just that someone saw someone go in the day before, so they're wondering if it was like the person who owns it trying to get rid of their investment or whatever. That's about the only interesting thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's and did it cause a fire when they have to come out in sub-zero weather and throw water on a house so that it turns into an igloo?
Yeah, pretty much. The house was pretty much gone. It's just a crater now. But
was the house on a cul-de-sac?
No.
Oh, see?
Did French people live there?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, see, I think I've just proven myself correct.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know. Okay, so I'm doing something new today. I'm throwing. They used to teach kids how to swim by taking them to the end of the dock and throwing them into the lake. That's how Teddy Roosevelt was taught how to swim by his father.
It's also how they could tell who's a witch.
Good news, everyone! Little Teddy is not a witch. So someday,
as they float,
he'll be president. So when she recovers from Skye's semi-offensive non sequiturs, will tell us what we're going to talk about today. Hey, Kaitlyn, what would you like to talk about today on the news? What's your first story? Go.
Okay, don't say what would I like to talk about, because I don't know that any of the things are things I want to talk about.
Okay, Kate. Okay, let me rephrase that. I'm sorry, I set you up wrong, and it's going to set this all off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
So, Kaitlyn, what do you think we should address?
Yes, better question. And I feel like you're making me do this so that you don't have to be responsible for
I would
what
never
we have to talk about.
I would never put you in a situation where people might become unhappy with you and you might lose speaking opportunities.
I think I've heard you plan to do that before. Okay, I want to talk about Ravi Zacharias, and unfortunately, I feel like we have to, because
I don't know anything about him.
Okay, he's an apologist. He was an apologist. He died last year.
My family knows him.
Oh, really?
He's been to my grandpa's Bible conference multiple times. Yeah. So, he was a semi-family friend. Unfortunately, Ravi Zacharias, apologist, and he's ordained in our denomination, Skye, and my denomination, the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is partly why he came to my grandpa's Bible conference multiple times. And he was one of the first, Christian intellectuals I was exposed to as a kid, thinking, okay, so, you don't have to, check your brain to be a Christian. So we were fond of him. So then what happened, Kaitlyn?
I mean, this is a pretty long saga. There have been a few accusations against Ravi Zacharias since 2016. But then late last year, there were even more kind of explosive allegations about his abuse of massage therapists, especially in Atlanta, but some other places in the country and around the world. And then the RZIM launched an investigation, and just a couple of days ago, the report came out
that's his ministry, RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
So pretty bad allegations. The report said they were credible. There was evidence. And then a combination of that report, and then David French wrote a piece that kind of also went through just the institutional problems, the way that from those very beginning allegations in 2016 and 2017, there were pretty sustained efforts to discredit victims and to just kind of rally the troops that if you were questioning things in the organization, you were labeled disloyal. Someone was put on a forced sabbatical to kind of keep her from continuing to ask questions. So just really, really heartbreaking stuff. And a lot of people are dealing with like it personally, someone who's influenced them really significantly.
Right, because he was a part of a lot of people's faith stories. It was this book, or I heard him speak, or I knew him, met him at this event, and he helped me get over these intellectual hurdles in my faith or strengthen my faith. So a lot of people don't know what to think or feel about it, except, wounded. And you've got, if a Christian minister owns spas, maybe that's a red flag. I don't know. Is that Skye? What? Help me out, Skye. Should that have been a red flag? Why do you own massage parlors?
In and of itself, is it a red flag? Maybe, but I think the bigger red flag is if you're going to do that, if you're going to do something that just on the surface is kind of weird looking, there should be that much more transparency and accountability.
Right.
And that seemed to be, especially in David French's assessment of the report, that seemed to be a reoccurring theme of him he didn't use company or ministry email systems. He didn't use ministry telephone systems. He didn't. There was no transparency in his communications and his like all that weird stuff. He apparently kept an apartment in
two apartments.
But he kept one for himself in Bangkok, and then one for his massage therapist in Bangkok, which is weird. And he would often travel with a massage therapist, a woman.
He had back trouble. So
I have back trouble. I don't think I've ever had a masseuse travel with me. In fact, I don't recall ever having had a massage anywhere, other than with my wife present. Somebody gave us a couples massage once when we were at a retreat, but that's it.
I don't need any details.
I know. My point is, like, it's just weird I can't imagine any ministry or church saying to a ministry leader who's traveling with a female masseuse, that's okay.
Raise issues, because that was wasn't that part of the Billy Graham code? Is that you could not travel with a female masseuse? Isn't that one
way of putting it?
Stipulations. Yeah. Okay, Kaitlyn, why should we care? Is this just the story of, I guess he's not a good guy. I guess I have to move him from the category of good guy to not a good guy. End of story, move on. Why can't I do that?
Well, I think his story is obviously like a really extreme example of like abuse all over the world and cover up. And even the fact that the members of the RZIM board are not public information, like things like that we could learn from. Like, if I ever have any influence over a huge ministry with this kind of reach, here are things I should do. But really heartbreakingly, this is not an uncommon story for even just a small town, tiny church pastor or someone who has any kind of spiritual authority over people to abuse it. And so if we aren't looking at this situation and asking, what safeguards are in my own context for someone in that kind of position to not abuse it, but also how do I end up not being like one of those people at RZIM who heard things and went, oh, that can't be true of this person I love, and so I'm not going to investigate them because it could hurt my reputation, because it just is so impossible for me to believe. Like, how do I become the kind of person that if I'm ever in a situation where accusations like that come to me about someone I care about, I have the ability to handle them transparently, to investigate them well, and if they're credible and legitimate, to really heartbreakingly have to confront someone, to call the authorities, to do like what's necessary, instead of being one of plenty of people along the chain that just kind of went, it's too dangerous to the reputation of our organization. It's too hurtful to this person I care about for me to do anything that I need to do to stop it. And then, there was even in the David French article, there were things that they knew that were institutional problems and evidence about him with massage therapists 4 years before his death. That's 4 years of abusing women that could have been stopped if some people had just had the courage to really stand up to him and to stand up to like the kind of collective power of the organization.
Right. So one Baptist leader commented that kind of gave it a, there, but for the grace of God, go I. We would all do that if we're all capable of doing that. So let's not get too high and mighty. And I saw someone react to that specifically because it was one of the Southern Baptist leaders saying, so, we'll kind of give him a pass as a serial abuser, but if you choose the wrong theoretical framework for looking at race, that's an unforgivable sin. So why do we? Because that's not. There are cases. There was a survey, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. 30% of pastors, confidentially acknowledged that they at some point have struggled with pornography. And that's a scenario where I do think, there, but for the grace of God, go I. That's a very common struggle. But abusing women that's a whole different. I can't wrap my head around. I don't think that's we're all capable of that. I would like to think we are not all capable of that. Where'd Skye go? Skye just disappeared off of our chart.
He dropped. I hope he'll be back soon.
Skye.
He didn't want to talk about it.
Yes, yeah. Skye disappeared and he's back now. So we're going to put him on the spot and he's going to tell us, Skye, how do we think about stories like Ravi? Here's a question. His publisher has dropped his books. Several people I've seen online say, I'm throwing out all his books.
Yeah.
If he had valuable teaching or contributed valuable arguments to apologetics in general, what do we do with his teaching?
Yeah, I just wrote a piece last week in my devotional about Martin Luther King Jr. and his serial adultery, which I think it's a little different. I mean, we don't know all the details of King, but with Ravi Zacharias, it's not just a moral failure. It's not that he succumbed to temptation. This was predatory abuse, right? That's, I think, of a different nature and magnitude. That's a big factor in this. Secondly, doesn't mean everything he said and preached and wrote and taught is no longer valuable or useful. No, I think it is. I don't know if I would throw away all of his books or discontinue publishing any of it, but I think what I would do if I were the publisher is I would temporarily discontinue them, and then I would invite somebody to write a thoughtful introduction to those books and put it and disclose, hey, here's a side of Ravi we didn't know about until after his death that we need to factor in, and yet so much of what he said and taught is valuable and truthful, but not hide the parts of his life that we weren't aware of. So I don't want to get into this mindset of anybody who's failed or done anything horrible is automatically erased from the annals of Christian history and thought. But I don't want to sugarcoat it either and make it sound like what he did wasn't horrible. And related to this, though, I think he's a really good example. I mean, obviously an incredibly brilliant and intelligent man. And it's important that we not confuse intelligence for intimacy with God. Just because you know a lot, just because you can articulate a lot, just because you can speak eloquently, that's not fruit of the Spirit. That's not love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. That's not what we ought to be looking for in a Christian leader as evidence of intimacy with God. And so often we get caught up in that and think, well, look at how much impact he's having. Look how brilliant he is. Look how he sticks it to the atheist or whatever. And we think that must be a sign that he's empowered by God for the mission of the kingdom. And we're just looking at the wrong fruit too often.
Right. And isn't it, because his work was primarily head work, not heart work. It was, let's wrestle with these issues, intellectual issues. I'm kind of looking at if you're doing like biblical archaeology and it turns out you're actually kind of a jerk, there's still value to the biblical archaeology you did.
Right.
If you're writing devotionals, if you're trying to show people how to walk with Jesus daily, and it turns out you're kind of a jerk, I think that's a whole different thing. I don't want you to lead me into my walk with Jesus if you don't seem to have it yourself.
That's valid, but I think I wasn't a deep student of Ravi's work, and I didn't read all of his books, but I think he did get into some of that stuff. That's what makes it hard. It wasn't just here's a logical argument for the existence of God. I think he did get into those more relational and faithful aspects of the Christian life, of living the Christian life. And that's where his credibility has been obliterated in many ways. And for me, like just in the last couple of days of wrestling with this, I wasn't deeply impacted by him. I wasn't close to him. I think I met him once or twice, but my faith was not shattered by this news, as tragic and horrible as it is. But here's the question that has been on my mind, given the frequency of these implosions that we've been seeing in recent years. I think the question people have been asking is, does our ministry culture allow this kind of behavior to go on unchecked? And I think that question now needs to shift. Not from does ministry culture allow this addictive, abusive behavior, but does our ministry culture actually create this abusive, addictive behavior?
Right.
And that's a question I don't think enough of us are wrestling with yet. We know that there's too many ministries that allow this to happen and they cover it up and they make excuses for it or whatever. But I think we need to go deeper and realize that there's something endemic in evangelical ministries that actually creates this kind of abuse.
Well, isn't this similar to the discussion about policing? And
right,
the argument but we got some bad apples. We need a better system for rooting out the bad apples. To other people saying, no, wait a minute, if there are this many bad apples, there's something wrong in the orchard.
Well, and people forget the saying, a few bad apples spoils the batch or bunch or whatever it's called. Like, that's the whole point
I don't think that's the saying.
It's a few bad apples. What is the whole saying? A few bad apples.
I don't think
I'm looking it up.
I don't think it's apples, but it's policemen. That's the saying.
Here it is. A few bad apples spoil the bunch. That's the saying. That's the
Really?
cliche. Yes. A few bad apples spoil.
Caitlin,
And we
did
always
you know
want to
that?
say, oh, there's just a few bad apples, but we forget that it spoils the bunch.
It spoils the bunch. Now we know we have qualitative evidence in the form of a saying that is on the internet that a few bad apples.
Well, my point is you have to at some point investigate the bunch and not just look at the bad apples.
Right, but it's not just that the bunch has become spoiled by the bad apples. It's that the bunch came from a tree that was grown in such a distorted way that it's producing bad apples reliably.
Yeah, let's really beat this metaphor to death.
Thank you. Well, do you have anything you'd like to add to that metaphor, Kaitlyn?
No, I don't want to touch that metaphor.
Okay. I was listening to a Tim Gambas podcast. He's a theologian at what's the name? Cornerstone. He's at Cornerstone. It used to be Grand Rapids Baptist. Yeah, it's Grand Rapids Seminary. And he was talking, he's been wrestling. He was raised, in the evangelical church. He still considers himself in the evangelical church, but he's, like so many others, wrestling with what he's now looking at, with the awareness that he has. And he raised the point just last week that his conclusion is, historically, evangelical Christianity, it's not just that it created a culture, it's that that's really all it is a culture. It's not a cohesive theological statement. It's not a cohesive behavior. It's not a structure of any kind. It's a culture, and that it's a culture based on celebrity. That the leaders in evangelicalism have always been whoever is the biggest celebrity. Right. And that's why Ted Haggard was the head of the NAE, even though he had huge personal, moral things that we hadn't discovered yet. But he was one of the biggest celebrities in evangelicalism, so he got that largely symbolic job. So, is this an outcome of the celebrity culture that is? I started with George Whitefield, who was one of the two most famous men in the English-speaking world, besides the King of England. So, did we just get off on the wrong foot when we picked celebrity pastors and started following them?
I'm going to say no.
Okay, good.
And here's why.
I'm more cynical than Skye is. Make a note of that.
I think there have always been celebrity pastors. You can go back to Peter in Acts chapter 2. You can talk about John Chrysostom. There's always been really gifted Christian leaders who become...
Did they become celebrities?
Yeah,
Seriously.
They did to a degree. John Chrysostom, his name means golden mouth or golden... Yeah, because he was such a great speaker, everyone wanted to hear him. But
whoever named him was impressed with his speech. That's all we know about that.
Well, we still talk about him today because he was a big deal, and he, But here's my point. I think the difference is, and I've written about this in years past, is we have turned celebrity now, Christian celebrity, into a business, and there are economic interests that perpetuate this and keep creating more and more Christian celebrities. And they create ministries that rely on that celebrity. And if we find out something about them that is dangerous or threatens the financial security of that thing, we guard them. They become too big to fail. So I think it isn't just celebrity. It's celebrity as business or economic interest that marks evangelicalism. That's why I call it the evangelical industrial complex. And it elevates people not based on their character or their intimacy with God, or even their wisdom, but it elevates them based on, can they draw a crowd? Can they sell books? Can they make money? That's the criteria today. And then we're shocked when it turns out they don't have the character to carry that weight.
Right. Okay. Kaitlyn, you also brought up Dave Ramsey. Why'd you bring up Dave Ramsey?
Yeah. We could talk for a long time about Dave Ramsey in connection to the way that institutions take on the character of the person who starts them. And we have incentives to try and elevate that person and, protect them from any claims against them. The thing that kind of really got Dave Ramsey some flack on the internet this week was his interview on Fox News, where he was asked about stimulus checks. And he basically said, if $400 or $600 or $1,400 would change your life, then you've got some other issues going on, and then lists like relationships, career, mental health issues. Like, that's your real issue, not this money. And I don't think if that statement was made in a vacuum, it would have received the pushback that it did. I think it really stems from people's awareness of Dave Ramsey's entire kind of program, his program in a vacuum might be fine, but some of the language and logic that goes around in kind of defending it is really based in a lot of disdain for the poor and ignorance of social structures that can change people's circumstances, the kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And so when he then, in the middle of a global pandemic, says, I don't believe in stimulus checks because if you need just, a few $100s to get by, then there's something else wrong with you.
Right.
Doesn't really fly with people.
Kind of the core message. If this little money helps you, your life is a mess. You're and when there's a little bit of you're a loser. So we shouldn't be handing out that much money because, losers are going to be losers. And some of the things he said when he did the big, maskless party and said he didn't want no $10 an hour hotel employee telling his wealthy guests, to put on masks. That's some, which you would say, okay, so maybe he's just a finance guy and he's not trying to be a Christian thought leader, but he makes so much noise about the culture of his company as a Christian company and that he holds the employees of his company to Christian morality standards,
supposedly Christian morality standards. Yeah.
Well, his view, but it's very similar to Ravi and his corporate culture in that the assumption is, we circle the wagons around our leader. Yeah. The assumption is you're going to be loyal, not that you're going to, poke or lift the covers and see what's going on. Because when they investigated one of the first investigations into Ravi that they did internally, and that supposedly Skye and my denomination participated in, although there's a question about how much they were really involved, he wouldn't even turn over his phone. He wouldn't let them look at his phone. So if we're talking about sexual messages and photos being exchanged, and I won't let you look at my phone, I don't know how you then say, oh, we investigated and we think he's clean.
That's the part, I have been on a committee that has investigated allegations against leaders in my denomination. And one of the things in this particular instance that I'm thinking of that was troubling is the failure of that leader to fully cooperate, right? To not reveal, that's a big red flag. If you're not willing to be investigated and cooperate fully, then sorry, I think we have to presume guilt rather than innocence. This isn't a court of law. This is a Christian ministry. And his failure to cooperate should have been immediately disqualifying. But again, hundreds of employees, millions and millions of dollars, massive kingdom impact, who knows how many lives affected. And the weight went to, well, let's just be quiet and we won't make a stink about this. And that's a problem, but I don't think it's the root issue. I don't think it's simply lack of accountability that we need to wrestle with. It is an issue. We need to look at why does this keep happening and what is it about the evangelical leadership culture that actually, I think, creates addiction and abuse.
Okay. I have a friend, her name is Kaitlyn, and she tweeted something of a couple of days ago related to this. She said, I'm just a girl standing in front of evangelicalism, asking it to protect women from abuse without resorting to purity culture rules that make it impossible for us to have careers. That was fun. Did that get any? That got some response, Kaitlyn.
I can say anything about politics, and I do not get the angry emails that I got when I said that.
You really? So some people didn't like that? Let me repeat it so that we can try to digest it. I'm just a girl standing in front of evangelicalism, asking it to protect women from abuse without resorting to purity culture rules that make it impossible for us to have careers. Okay.
What was the nature of the pushback you got from that?
Yeah. Because I looked at that and said, wow, I think that's accurate.
I mean, some people don't like Notting Hill, so that was the first one. The other ones, most of it was people who, and I'm guessing, again, a lot of this, part of the reason people have such strong reactions is questions about gender, sexuality, and questions about people's jobs, emotionally fraught, and people get really invested. And if you feel like you've ever been falsely accused of something, that's what I got a lot of pushback from was I have the rules that I have about meeting with women or not meeting with women because they were honest. It wasn't really to protect women. It's to protect me from, claims against me. And I understand the fear of that, there's pretty good evidence that there's a pretty small risk of that happening to you. Most accusations are legitimate, but I understand the fear of it, and I understand the desire. And then the more like kind of honorable thing of like, I just want to honor God, and, you know, including with the way that I interact with people of the opposite sex, and I want to honor my wife or my husband, or like, I get the people who are just like, I am just trying to do the right thing. I didn't give any lists of rules in that tweet that you should or shouldn't follow. My desire was just to say, if your rules are making it impossible for women to be involved in the full life of the church and the world, if they're not allowing women to advance in their career because you have social interactions with men that you wouldn't have with women, because you meet one-on-one with them and have career advice and mentoring and those kinds of things. You know, I'm in a seminary context and have been in a bunch of churches on staff. It is incredibly difficult for women to get the kind of career advancement that men get in those spaces in particular, because even if you're not following a certain set of rules, there's just such a strong cultural sense that men and women can't be friends without something, you know, not good going on, or that any woman who's trying to advance is going to either seduce a man, you know, to do it, or that she just doesn't have the right motivations for doing it. Whereas a man who wants to advance is often seen as, you know, driven and motivated and wants to change the world for Christ. And, you know, but a woman is often seen as a threat or as some kind of danger. And so if we can have, you know, things in place to prevent women from being abused and to prevent the very, very small instances where men might be falsely accused, but not do it in such a way that we just say women stay at home and men work, that would be preferable to me.
All right. So you're willing to go on the record and say that?
Yeah, I did it. I did it on
you
Twitter.
You did. But you're not, you know, you're not taking it. You're not backing down because you got some pushback.
No.
Did you engage with the pushback?
A few times. It was very rare in this instance that someone had a legitimate, just like, I would like to have a conversation about this. Most of the time it was, I didn't even mention Ravi and I didn't mention the Billy Graham rule, but the amount of angry comments about both of those situations, if you read a ton into the initial tweet, then like, I don't know how to have a conversation with you about it. So.
Okay. So you okay? Everything okay? Has it calmed down?
No, but I mean, it's okay.
Okay, but
Skye,
going back to the Billy Graham rule, what's the point of having a Billy Graham rule if it's violated, nobody calls you out on it? Which seems to be what happened with Ravi, right? He was alone with women, and his institution, his organization, his board, his accountability didn't care. So who cares then if you have the rule if it's not enforced? And I'm not saying I'm an advocate of the rule, but it isn't like the Billy Graham rule has been around for a long time and it doesn't seem to work, is my point. Like they're advocating for something that if its intent was to protect women and stop men from misbehaving, it hasn't worked. So, I mean, it may have worked in Billy Graham's case. I'm not saying it didn't for him, but broadly, we've been talking about this for decades, and it isn't like people look at the evangelical subculture and go, now they've got it figured out.
Right.
So that's the evidence just isn't there.
There was a brief moment in the sun where only the Catholic Church looked bad, and we were thinking, hey, we're looking pretty good. And that was about a minute and a half.
Yeah.
Didn't last. All right, what can we do? Any suggestions? Kaitlyn, any suggestions?
I mean, honestly, I said this on Twitter too, but I don't think we should look at situations like this and go, what are the rules for every interaction between a man and a woman ever? And I don't think we should look at this. I mean, like you said, Phil, about the tweet that was like, oh, you know, all of us could end up in this situation. Mm-hmm. I think all of us could end up in the situation of being someone on the RZIM board or someone in Dave Ramsey's company that sees things and doesn't say anything about it because it's easier in the moment to let it slide. You didn't do anything wrong, right? You just didn't speak up about the really powerful, famous person doing something bad. And I really think it's really convicted me, honestly, about all of the little times I've had an opportunity to tell the truth about something. You know, a professor in one of my classes says something that is either false or, you know, harms a group of marginalized people. And I go, ooh, it would really cost me something small, but still cost me something in the moment in class to raise my hand and say, no, I mean, we really shouldn't say things like that. Or at a church, an organization, those little things, I think we can kind of let those little things slide. And then in 20 years, when the thing comes out about the guy and you have to make the choice about whether to investigate it or not, you'll suddenly have all this courage to take the hard stance and do it when you haven't been practicing courage for all those years. And for me, it was just convicting to go, I don't think I'm ever going to be in a situation where I'm the head of this giant ministry and I have to worry about putting safeguards in place for myself. I think I might be very easily in a situation where I'm someone who could hold that person accountable, but I haven't prepared over the course of my life to have the kind of courage necessary to do it.
Right. It just seems so often we think we're defending God or God's work by covering up bad things that we have done, that our leaders have done. I don't know how we get to that point where we don't think God can succeed without the help of someone who is hurting people. It's just messed up. Skye, last thought, Skye.
I think we have to realize, and I think there's plenty of theology to back this up, that anyone is capable of anything. And the moment you start believing that somebody couldn't possibly fill in the blank, you're in trouble. We have to realize we are all capable of anything. And we need to learn to put our faith in Christ, not in his servants. And I'm not saying that every Christian leader is, a terrible, abusive monster, but we are all capable of it. And we need to construct our accountability and our ministries in a manner that believes that possibility.
All right. Thanks, guys. We have a guest, right, Skye?
We do.
That's fantastic. I don't know who it is. I'll let it be a surprise. It's going to be a surprise.
It's a good one.
Is it one that I did or one that you did?
I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, then it's a good one.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
This week is the beginning of Lent. Have you ever wondered why Christians give up something during Lent, like chocolate or sweets or Netflix? It's not just to sacrifice something randomly. The whole point was to take out some of the distractions in your life so that you could have more time to focus on communion with God. If that's something that you desperately want, to deepen your life with God, I encourage you to find something that you can remove from your life, but to then take that space to add something new in. And that something new could be With God Daily, the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals. I started With God Daily back in 2014 because I couldn't find a daily devotional that I really liked, one that was intellectually rigorous, culturally relevant, and deeply engaged in Scripture. With God Daily comes out 5 days a week via email. It's formatted for your smartphone, or you can get the mobile app, which allows you to look at past series as well as engage the audio devotional. With God Daily includes a reading that I've written every day, along with an historic prayer of the church and links to relevant passages of Scripture. Right now, we're going through a series on the sermons of Martin Luther King Jr. and their remarkable relevance for us today. If you want to learn more about With God Daily and how you can sign up, go to withgoddaily.com and discover the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals. I'm not a Southern Baptist, neither is Phil, and yet we talk about the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, quite a bit on this podcast because it is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. And because of its size, the SBC has a lot of influence and reflects a lot of what's really going on within evangelical America. The SBC has also been sending very mixed messages about the issue of race. On the one hand, some of its leaders have been trying to move beyond its racist heritage in order to bring reconciliation and unity to the church. But on the other hand, it's rejected some things like critical race theory and been highly critical of leaders who've embraced anything that looks at all progressive politically. Recently, some of the SBC's most visible and gifted African American leaders have chosen to leave the denomination. One of them is Charlie Dates. He's been on our podcast before. He's a friend of ours and a fellow Chicagoan. Dr. Charlie Dates is the senior pastor of Chicago's Progressive Baptist Church. He's also an affiliate professor at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, which is where I went to seminary. He's written and contributed to a number of books, and he's just one of the sharpest thinkers in the church today, bringing a deep commitment to the authority of Scripture and a deep understanding of this cultural moment into his preaching and into his ministry. So we invited Charlie to come back on the show and talk to us about his own journey with the SBC in helping to lead his church into fellowship with that denomination, and then why he chose to leave. I think you'll find his thoughtfulness and depth really refreshing, and I think his experience will help you understand better what's really going on with America's largest Protestant denomination. So here is Dr. Charlie Dates. Charlie Dates, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Thank you, man. It's been a little while, but I'm glad y'all are having me back.
Yeah, how have you been? You surviving the pandemic?
We are doing okay. Family is well, very grateful. My mother passed last year during the pandemic, not COVID related, but nonetheless a seismic, life marking kind of moment that was for us. And so, really, in one sense, in view of that, man, super grateful. My wife and I are in that phase where we are caring now for her parents a bit more as we raise our own children. So
that's
doing all right.
Finding ourselves in that sandwich between the younger generation and the older generation. And during the pandemic, it's been incredibly stressful with kids at home and then caring for the health of our parents and worrying about that. So there's a lot of people who can relate to you in that front. So, Charlie, you are one of the more brilliant thinkers out there right now in our generation of Christian leaders. You are tackling the hard issues. You're one of those pastors who's not backing away from some of the more controversial stuff. And I've appreciated that so much about you. But you, in particular, wrote a piece, I think it was back in December.
Yeah, December 18th.
About the Southern Baptist Convention and some of your journey within the SBC over the last number of years. And I read it and thought, wow, this just encapsulates so much of what's going on right now. So I wanted to have you on to talk about that journey. And I think it might be instructive for a lot of people, whether they're SBC or not, in figuring out what's going on in so much of the American church today and the divides that we're experiencing and the attempts to overcome those divides. So let's get into that a little bit. Talk to me first about you and your congregation's journey toward the Southern Baptist Convention and what drew you into orbit with that denomination.
Yeah, so I think I got the bulk of the question as it glitched again. So let me start with a bit of our journey toward the SBC. I think that's what you're saying. So I got Skye. I have been invited by the grace of God for a number of years now, 15 that I could think of, to preach in non-predominantly Black and brown spaces. So just to think of that in terms of my formation, I would say 18 years now that I think about it, just being in a number of spots as a son of the Black church, as a pastor or pastoral apprentice for a while within the Black church context. I just got a chance to taste and see and feel, quite frankly, the distinctions within evangelicalism. And I should go on record to say what I understand evangelicalism to mean. It is a high view of Scripture that is not necessarily taking Scripture literally, but interpreting Scripture within its historical, grammatical, literary, and cultural context, applying it therein. A high view of Christ, those cardinal doctrines that say Christ is the only way to the Father, a high Trinitarian kind of gospel view, and a view that says that the gospel is not just God's saving message, but it's a mandate for the church to reach the world with that saving message so as to win people to Christ. So a lot of those things, even in my formation, theological, academic formation, were really just affirmed from my growing up in our local Black church here in Chicago. But traveling in these different ethnic contexts, I started to see that the emphasis of those high views of Scripture, high view of Christ, and doctrines led to different points of application. So we had the same structural core beliefs, but we did not necessarily do the same thing with them. And so I started maybe about 6-7 years ago being invited to some of the universities within the Southern Baptist Convention. And we had started an African-American church renewal residency. So I pastor a historic church in Chicago, which was in pretty rough shape when we came. I don't say that to any shame of the church or any glory to me. It just was, it had grown older. It had, by virtue of that, it really wasn't reaching the neighborhood anymore, just a number of those things. And so, but it was at one point a titan of a church, and we have been seeing God turn this thing around. And so I started to wonder, what might we do to help other churches like ours experience that kind of renewal and whatnot? And part of it was, if we could combine a program that helps students matriculate at schools that had a high view of Scripture and keep them in service to and reflection in the local Black church, we could probably churn out more pastors who could come into churches like this one and see God doing amazing work in the neighborhood. That's where the SBC comes in. We wanted to build this program, and we wanted some housing. So we were asking around with our home convention, which is the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and a few other agencies who could help us get some housing in Chicago. And it turns out that the SBC was willing to help us get housing, long story short. So we brought on a resident and his wife, and we did that for a number of years. And I just started preaching in some of these circles. I preached at 4 of their seminaries. I got invitations to preach at 5 of the 6. I preached the pastors' conference at the invitation of my friend, Pastor H.B. Charles Jr., and really just was warmly received, Skye, to be honest with you. So I came to our church and I said, because I believe in denominational work. And I said, guys, listen, I think I kind of turned in on my own church. Said, if we're going to have the most prophetic witness, then I think we should aim to have what's called dual affiliation. Stay with our home convention, but link up with the Illinois Baptist State Association, which is part of the SBC, and be a witness for Christ in a polarizing racial context.
And how was that received when people heard you say, hey, let's link arms with the SBC?
Yeah. So it was not taken very well by some, and understandably so. I mean, our people know the history. They've lived the history. This is a church of 5 generations. And so they said, Pastor, those people don't like us. They said they told Dr. King he was in sin. And it wasn't until recently that they apologized for affirming slavery. But even thereafter, they did not do much by way of reaching out to Black churches to live out that apology. And so one of them even said, we need to move from apologies to strategy. Like, what are we going to do to actually bridge the divide and to make changes happen? And so I told them, no, these guys are different. Of course you got the people of old, but that mentality no longer thrives in that community. And so I brought up people. I had gotten to know Steve Gaines and meet J.D. Greer, and HB's my buddy, and Matthew Hall at Southern Seminary, and Danny Aiken, just a number of them, man, who were very warm and kind. Ronnie Floyd, Kevin Ezell, very kind men. And so I told our church, hey, look, let's do it. But we didn't do it right away. It took us about 2 years.
Back up a minute, because in the article, you also mentioned the MLK 50 event that happened in Memphis, which commemorated the 50th anniversary of his assassination, which was hosted by the SBC.
Yes.
So was that a symbolic event for you, or was it more meaningful that the SBC was the one actually commemorating MLK after, decades earlier having condemned him?
I thought, and still do think, under the leadership of Russell Moore, because that was the ERLC, that it was meaningful. It was not merely symbolic. And I can tell you that it was meaningful because the conversations behind the scenes were jagged in one sense, in terms of the disagreements within certain evangelical camps. It wasn't just the ERLC, though. It's the Gospel Coalition as well, and then a number of others who were in that environment. And so there was a reckoning happening. And to be honest with you, when I walked into the convention hall that morning to give that address, it was with my wife. We were walking down the aisle, and I said, I feel it. Like I'm in the space. I'm okay. Like I'm going to be able to say what I need to say. Because while writing the message, Skye, you can appreciate this. And knowing the groups that are inviting you, you can already be imagining in your head, this ain't going to go over well.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. I mean, not in the same sense that you were. But yes, I knew before I got on a platform, this is going to be my one and only time speaking here.
Yeah. So So all I can tell you is before I even took my seat to get mic'd up, I knew that I was wrong because the energy was young, white Christians who had shown up and a number of black ones who had shown up to kind of process what was going on here. And so I actually felt the freedom of the spirit to lean in to it a bit more. And so when I came home, check this, man, when I came home, the former chair of my trustee board, who is also the superintendent of our discipleship program, who also is a lifelong PMBCer, who also wanted nothing to do with the SBC. When I came home, he gave me a hero's welcome. Tears in his eyes at one point. This guy's in his late 70s, man, maybe early 80s. And so I felt like it was not only a meaningful moment there in Memphis, but I started to feel like it was a meaningful breakthrough here in Chicago.
So there was real hope that this is a new day and there's new opportunities to not just apologize, as someone said, but strategize together and work together. Okay.
Yes.
So
and I don't think, Skye, that there was this pie in the sky optimism. I think we knew it would be challenging, but I just saw from the opposition I anticipated there and the opposition I anticipated here that there was the possibility of some wonderful breakthrough.
it sounds like many of the people you mentioned, some of whom I know, some I don't, I would argue also they're very genuine. They definitely want to see that kind of work move forward. So when was the first time after you affiliated that you began to sense that maybe this marriage wasn't going to last?
Oh, yeah.
Right. When did you go, maybe I didn't get a full picture of what's really going on in the SBC world?
Yeah, I think... So I pause here because I don't want to say too much, but I also don't want to say too little. I preached the Expositor Summit at Southern Seminary in 2019, which is a wonderful meeting. And I got some time with Dr. Moeller, who I have a high regard for, quite frankly. And, Moeller is this kind of like culture warrior, a voice for conservatism in America, Christian conservatism. And so I thanked him for not coming out to back Mr. Trump in 2016. And that led to a conversation where I went on to ask him not to do it again. And aside from our disagreements about politics, my request, Skye, was based on the harm, very real harm and ideological harm that I felt like Mr. Trump proposed as a threat to Black and brown Christians. So I just did it on that ground.
Well, and the fact that Al Mohler had not supported him in 2016 didn't make it sound like an unusual request for you to, hey, just stay the course like you did 4 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, politics, I was in a meeting recently, Lord have mercy. And because we air on a station, a rather conservative white station, and some of my comments, which I didn't even think were harsh, created a brouhaha. And one of the persons in the meeting said, with the Black church, it's like political. We know that. It's more political is what they said. And I thought to myself, well, surely not more political than some people I have come to know and meet who are not Black pastors. So anyway, yeah, there is this kind of sense of, it's not merely political. So stay the course because there's something deeper here. But it ended up being about politics. And so that's when I saw the signs. It was like spring of last year. And I tell that story because when Dr. Moeller came out and said that he saw himself voting for the Republican Party for the rest of his life, basically, and really the Republican Party was a choice for Christians, I felt like he didn't hear me at all. And I, again, I have such high regard for Moeller. I tend to think of him as the titular head of the SBC. He may not be the president of the executive committee or the president of the convention just yet, but he has that kind of influence. And so I I just thought, what a blatant disregard for a very real concern for Black and brown people and Black and brown Christians. And given that year too encapsulated George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many others whose names down through the years we could call, that to me was the absolute, I want to be very careful. It was the grossest of disaffection. It was painful. And it harkened back to all of the history that I have read about the SBC. All of a sudden, those names and voices started to come alive to me that I'd only read in history books. And their staunch opposition to Black freedom and the liberation of Black bodies and Black people. And I know that my white conservative evangelical brothers and sisters may not read it the same way that I do, but they also don't live in this skin. And they don't have this experience. And a lot of them ain't even read a book on the Black experience. So for me, when that happened, I was wholly uncomfortable. And I didn't say anything. I mean, I called some people and I said, would y'all please call our mutual friend? And friend, he may think that's too strong of a word, but would you call our mutual acquaintance and ask him not to say these kinds of things? And then, man, on Reformation Day, he and the president were tweeting each other.
So when that happened, very often we have a bias towards what we want to be true, right? So, but when you encounter a bit of cognitive dissonance where something occurs that doesn't fit what you want to be true, we have a way of isolating it and excusing it. When Dr. Mohler had that conversation with you when he eventually came out and publicly endorsed Donald Trump, did you in your own mind go, okay, well, that's unfortunate, but it's just Dr. Mohler. It's not the whole SBC. It's that. Were you able to isolate that, or did it begin to seep out and change the way you were viewing the whole relationship with the SBC?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned it. Strangely enough, this is a coaster on my stand-up desk that I got at Southern. It's one of the buildings at Southern Seminary. I was thinking because I don't want to make this all about Dr. Mohler.
Right.
I want to be clear and say I think Dr. Mohler is doing what he thinks is the right thing to do, but I think his voice is representative, as he would say, of a more mainstream group within the SBC. And Doc is he's bold enough to say it. I represent what these people think, by and large.
And he is also seeking to become president of the SBC, which it's pretty hard to do if you are bucking what the majority of people within the denomination think and believe politically.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so here's the deal. I want to be very clear in how I say this too, Skye. It just is what it is. So you talk about when do you come to that moment of realization? There's no hate in my heart. There is no love loss in this respect. It is what it is. They have shown me enough to know that the singers in my church were right. And
who was it? Maya Angelou or somebody said when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time.
Yeah.
Isn't that her? Yeah. So it sounds like you're right. The seniors in your congregation were correct. But to give you some credit here, your desire for reconciliation, to partner, to create a strategic alliance was built on that bridge of hopefulness that the future doesn't have to be bound by the past, right? We can go forward. And I applaud that optimism and hope, but I feel bad that it's been dashed.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I think that future still is possible, but it's only possible right now. Like I think within the next 20, 25 years, it's only possible to the extent that the SBC is willing to purge itself of its greater evils, those lingering ideas and harmful thoughts regarding racism.
It feels like recently they're kind of purging in the opposite direction, though.
Oh, brother.
Like they're losing really gifted leaders of color like yourself and others who are leaving. And part of that was accelerated by the seminary presidents coming out with their statement about critical race theory or critical theory in general. Explain what impact that had coming after your conversations with Dr. Mohler and his endorsement of Donald Trump.
Yeah. And then again, on the whole Twitter piece on October 31st, Donald Trump, I don't think is a Republican. All right. Just let me say that. I think if you look at George W. Bush, if you look at his dad, if you look at Ronald Reagan, even Trump is something else. Yeah. So to have Republican convictions isn't really an issue, but to back that particular personality and to voice policy over personality said something different to me about the race category. So when the president's statement came out, it was in line with these other things, and it felt wholly unnecessary in the milieu that we find ourselves residing. It also felt like dog whistling, that this was being done to say to a certain swath or strand of conservatism, we hear you and we agree with you. So critical race theory, for those who know what it is and who do not merely point every angle of it toward evil.
Does anyone really know what it is?
Right. I mean, so like the scholarship on it is divided. The people who write about it and the lawyers who've practiced these critical legal studies, they don't all agree on what it is. But what we do know is that the precursor is in Thurgood Marshall and is in Thurgood Marshall's, Charles Hamilton Houston is in Thurgood Marshall's trainer, so that the systemic or systematic dismantling of segregation through the courts was done on the back of critical legal studies. And then you have the emergence of the civil rights movement, which takes a more populist approach outside of the courts and adds to this not only legislation, but demonstration. And they are all framing their work in the idea of structural injustice, that something is systematically arranged in American society to keep certain people on the margins. It's out of that critical race theory is born. Because what critical race theory wants to do is it wants to, I'm going to use a word, I'm going to make up a word. It wants to create terms and a framework by which these things can be discussed in the courts, in government, and in society. And then it wants to systematically go after them. But because, a lot of people practice it can't agree, they don't fully know. Like it's not like the civil rights movement, but it is, in my opinion, it is born out of the civil rights movement and critical legal studies together, but it doesn't capture them. And at the same time, it's not anti like Dr. King in totality. So in my opinion, they were shooting at a straw man in one sense, but it hit us.
Yeah. So we had David Fitch on a few months ago to talk about critical race theory and critical theory in general. And he talked about viewing it as a tool, an instrument. And as an instrument, it can be used to uncover and diagnose real sin and injustice, or it can be used in an unhelpful way, in a harmful way, but it's a tool ultimately. But when I looked at the statement that came out from the SBC seminary presidents, what I can understand some of them expressing concern or some hesitation about the way critical theory is sometimes employed, whatever. But as a Christian leader in a denomination and looking at what are the things really plaguing, what are the temptations and false gospels and errors that are more prevalent within my community, it's pretty hard for me to make a case that the SBC is succumbing to some false vision of critical race theory, right? It seems like the far more pressing maladies are things like Christian nationalism and ongoing racism and seduction of political ideology and all kinds of other things that would be more pressing. It's like somebody coming to the doctor with a giant tumor growing out of the side of their body and the doctor being upset that they got a hangnail. Like, no, you deal with the thing that's going to kill them. You don't deal with the thing that's just an annoyance, right? So when you saw that statement and the way it came out, did you know right away that this is it? Like, we can't continue down this road in partnership? Or did you try to figure out a way to keep it going, but somehow extract yourself from some of the messier pieces of what was going on?
Right. So this to answer the question forthrightly, it was not just my decision. You know, our church has a plurality of leaders who have been tracking this throughout the year. And I would get occasional texts and say with links to articles before December, what's going on with this? Or what do you think about that? Or we need to hold our white evangelical brothers and sisters accountable, or other things. And so I did not know right away. I had to consult and just kind of feel out where our people were. And not only our leaders, but also some other highly respected Black pastors that I know whose churches are SBC. Mm-hmm. Just said, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. I almost feel complicit at this point by just because race to me, abortion is the biggest thing to them. Race to me is huge. All right. And like racism is a deal breaker. So I'm listening to these older, wiser pastors, and a few of them are saying, yeah, you know, I'm done too, or I'm considering. And so it became clear a few days later that we were not going to survive that particular treatise.
So when you and some of these other Black leaders announced that they were leaving or disassociating from the SBC, what kind of response did you get, whether publicly or even privately?
Well, first of all, my church and a number of personalities within my church have just said thank you. And so that's really in part what matters in this regard. And the response from around the country, some people were saying, we didn't even know you were in the SBC because we weren't even, there that long.
Yeah.
And then others took it too far, in either direction. They were glad you're gone. Good riddance. I got, some of that kind of mail and DMs and that kind of thing. And so and then some on the other hand were like, well, what took you so long? Why did you do it in the first place? So the response was broad and varied, but it was mainly, even from people within the SBC, white leaders within the SBC, it was mainly a we understand, which, there are leaders within the SBC who, to your point, are not only good people, but they are pushing against the very thing that I was pushing against. And they need to be encouraged and celebrated and applauded. So it's not the totality of the SBC that is a problem. I really do think that people like J.D. Greer and Russell Moore and Matt Hall and others are, and Adron Robinson, of course, who's there, and Dwight McKissick and Ronnie Floyd, some of those personalities are a bit more sensitive to the plight of Black and brown people and can read this moment for what it is.
Do you think that they have enough support within the SBC over time to actually turn this ship? Or, you tried it, many others tried it over the course of recent years, and it feels like they went hard back the other way. I've talked to so many Christians over the years, to bring it down to a much lower altitude, who are in a local church or a denomination that they struggle with in some way, whether doctrinally or missiologically. And they have come to me and said, when do I know it's time to leave? And when do I stay, right? When do I continue to try to push things in a right, healthy, godly direction? And when do I go, enough's enough, kick the dust off my feet and move on? Like, you and some other leaders decided with the SBC, we need to disassociate, move on. There are some who are staying there. like the leaders you mentioned. But do they actually have a shot at this, at changing things, or do you think it's they're throwing their pearls to swine?
I think the gospel compels me to believe that there is hope. Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as the Spirit of God is in the earth and we're living and breathing, yes. I just don't know that it's my assignment from God right now to forge ahead with that, because my sense of conviction is, and I didn't give it to myself, Skye, but my sense of conviction on the matters of race and Christianity are high. And it's, you ever been in a room where something really matters to you? It matters to other people, but it really matters to you. Like you're in tears and they're just sitting there sad. That's kind of how I feel in some of these conversations. This isn't just a political matter or let's turn the ship real slowly kind of piece. This is the witness of the church. And really, I think the salvation of the church in America as we know it, it's a round race. And this isn't the kind of thing that the largest Protestant body in America can just casually get to when it's ready, or move in the opposite direction. So I want to spend my years, as Lord willing, God shall give them to me, and the decade scores in front of me, in the places that will bear the most fruit. And I just don't know that the SBC is there right now. I guess we'll see this summer. My friend, more so mentor, Dwight McKissick, who's been in this fight for 45 years now, has some stuff he's looking for by this summer, which I don't know that he's going to get. But if the SBC loses someone like a Dwight McKissick, that's a mighty tree that leaves the forest. And so I don't know, but I do have hope.
It feels a little bit to me like a repeat of the conservative insurgency that happened in the SBC decades ago, when people like Dr. Al Mohler and others really took a prominent place, where there was this purging of anybody who held to more progressive theology. It was just expunged from the SBC, and it really doubled down. But what's going on now, it's not so much a theological insurgency as it is a political and cultural and racial one.
Yeah.
And
it's the other CRT. It's the conservative resurgence theory.
Well put. Yeah. But if they succeed in that, and they lose the kinds of leaders like you're talking about, and Dwight McKissick and others, like, that's it. Like, game over. They are, for the next generation, committed to not just being in the room and feeling sad about racism, whereas you feel it more, but like being actively opposed to the feelings that you and others like us have on this issue as being critical to the faith and the church in America. Like that feels pretty tragic to me, given the progress that it seems had been happening in recent years.
Yeah. I think, Skye, and can you hear me, by the way? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that the difference between now and then is that America is different. The demographics are different. We are swiftly moving to the point where white Americans will no longer be the majority ethnicity here in the United States. And so who's going to populate these schools? Who's actually going to go to these seminaries? Do the 6 seminary presidents actually think that signing that statement is going to bring more African American students who come from the indigenous Black church or Black community, or are they banking on getting more African American students who already align sociologically and politically with their beliefs? And what I think is, in the changing landscape of America, it will actually weaken those schools. And it very possibly can weaken that convention without tearing down these racial barriers and divisions. So, yeah.
Okay. So what you're getting, you kind of turned a corner here, because on one front, you really want Christian leaders to tackle the issue of racism for the right reason, because it's just the right, moral, godly, gospel thing to do. But if they won't do it for the right reason, some of us are okay with them doing it for the wrong reason, which is just the pragmatism of money, right? The demographic changes that are happening, the reality that your institutions and schools and seminaries and churches aren't going to survive if they are not engaging people of color, given the realities of where America's going, the browning of America. But I mean, I remember reading something that Dr. King said about some of the protests, the bus boycott, back in 1956. It was, you want white people to end segregation for the right reason, but if they won't, let's hit them in the pocketbook and withhold our money from the buses and things like that. And that might motivate them to do the right thing if it's for the wrong reason. And I feel like that's almost where we're at with some of what's going on in the white evangelical church, where for decades, leaders have resisted doing the right thing for the right reason. And now we're like, okay, well, then just do the right thing for the wrong reason. We're okay with, like, are we willing to settle for that? And that's the part that I find so just bewildering. Like, I remember John Ortberg saying that every organization has its mission and then it has its shadow mission. And the shadow mission for so many Christian ministries is just survival, like just economic and institutional survival. And it seems like even on that level, the SBC is being really short-sighted, because economic and institutional survival would mean a practical approach to the diversification of their conference. And yet they're shooting themselves in the foot even there, just like the Republican Party is doing that with, doubling down on white nationalism rather than appealing to Asian voters, Latino voters, African-American voters. Like, they're making no inroads with those groups. And it seems like demographic suicide. So what do you think on that front? Like, is there any hope that some of these groups will do the right thing for the wrong reason, if not the right reason?
Well, so again, Skye, I do think that there's hope. But I think what we're seeing is the true heart of these organizations. That maybe it was never really about gospel-centered reconciliation. Maybe it was more so about another gospel where you have to be like me and you have to think like me politically and sociologically. And that is the litmus test as to whether or not you have the real gospel. Paul says in Galatians, if me or anybody else comes to preach a different gospel to you, don't believe it. And the problem in America, I think, even with some of these conservative groups, is that they actually have morphed a real handle on the real gospel, or at least they're showing us that their handle on the real gospel is infected with something else.
Yeah.
So
Paul's a great example. Galatians is a great example. You had these Jewish believers who were telling Gentile believers, you can come in and be with us, but you need to get circumcised. You need to have a Jewish diet. You need to practice these Jewish customs, which was their way of saying what really unites us is Jewish tradition, not the cross. And some of these predominantly white evangelical groups are saying to Christians of color, you can come in and be a part of us, but you got to be a conservative politically. You got to hold to certain values and ideas that may contradict your own Christian experience and tradition, because what unites us is not the cross. It's white conservative American culture.
Yes. No, you said it better than I did. So I don't think to that point, there is reason toward doing the right thing for the wrong reason. And I do think too, you can be so rich and so wealthy that your money barricades you against doing the right thing. And the system is bent in your favor. So I don't even know how much they care about the next 2 to 3 generations and what they will inherit, because they have some insulation.
Yeah, how true is that? Easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, right? Might say a rich denomination.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Charlie, thank you for writing the piece. We'll link people to it. Thank you for just your model of wisdom, both wisdom in moving toward the SBC and the wisdom in which you handled moving away from them.
I'm glad you think of it as such.
Well, no, but here's one of the things that stood out to me is throughout the conversation and you retelling the story, you kept referring back to conversations you had with wise members of your church, and other wise leaders. And I think we don't pay enough attention to that and the importance of perspective that we get from discussing these things broadly with people who care for us and love us and have a long history and understanding of these things. More of us need to do that and not rely just on our own instincts here. But
Yeah. Well, let me say this too, Skye, and I could use your help on this. I'm rounding the corner on this book I've been working on for a while called What Hath Justice to Do with Righteousness? I'm trying to crystallize these ideas biblically, theologically, and socially to help tender-hearted people. I'm not talking about the hard-hearted folks.
Sure.
But tender-hearted people read the world and let Scripture interpret us from its rightful justice lens. And so the issue is I preach every week. And so, I mean, I'm slow on writing anything else. And I teach classes at schools and whatnot. But that is coming, because I think we need to leave on record for succeeding generations what might be a more biblically faithful response than what we're seeing today.
Yeah, that's one. I look forward to seeing it, because I think even for the younger Christians or people coming up in the generations behind us, they can't always articulate it, but they have an instinctual desire to see that kind of integrated faith. And it's the older generation that's disintegrated it, but they have more voices like yours and what we try to present on this podcast that presents a holistic, integrated vision of what God is redeeming in the world, including the systems. That's what's going to be the future of the church. And combine that with a high view of Scripture, like you said, a belief in a high Christology. That's what we're looking for. And that's what I think younger people are going to respond to. So I can't wait to see it. When is that book supposed to be done?
It was supposed to be done last year. So I'm on chapter 4 of 6 chapters. And so the chapter I'm on right now is actually, I don't want to say what it's called because I don't want people to, but it's explaining the first time I heard the word social gospel and how it was foreign to me, not only because of where I heard it, but the way it was being talked about.
Yeah, it was an insult, right?
It was a veiled threat. And I didn't even know it. I was just like, what are we doing here? And so that's where I am now.
I look forward. That's going to be fantastic. We'll definitely have you back on to talk about it. Maybe we'll have you on 6 times to talk about each chapter.
And I'd love it. Anytime y'all will. Really appreciate your work, Skye, and
likewise
your ministry.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Have a good one.
Thank you, buddy.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.